One of the first scrolls that was recovered is a scroll that goes by the name of the War Scroll, W-A-R, the War Scroll. It is a battle between good and evil, and it is a very real battle. It's not a metaphor. With so much information, some it's true, some it's false, misinformation, disinformation, fake information, AI-generated information, pretty soon people don't feel connected to their families or to their friends or to their society. And now they don't even know who to trust because the information, they don't know what information to trust. That is where society becomes very vulnerable. What in the world is going on? Why is it happening? And what can we do to ease the suffering to make our lives better? The conversation you and I are about to have is the underlying answer to all three of those questions.
This is by far one of the most important conversations I think I've recorded on this show. I'd like to welcome back to the show returning champion, Gregg Braden. How you doing, Greg?
Alex, I am beyond epic. I am so excited to be with you today. I'm excited to see you in your new environment.
Thank you, sir.
As usual, this is completely unscripted. We really don't know where we're going to go. I'm coming to you once again from our studio. We're just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the high desert, and it is just a beautiful, awesome day. So inspiring. The perfect day for you and I to have this conversation.
Well, I appreciate that, my friend. It's been a minute since you've been on the show, so I'm really looking forward to touching on some interesting ideas, interesting concepts that we haven't really talked about before. So the very first thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I would love to get your perspective, is, in the 90s, there was this big hoopla about the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I'm not mistaken. That's when at least I was made aware of it. And I was a young man and I heard about this. I was like, what do they find? What are the Dead Sea Scrolls? And since then, I've learned that there's been a lot of controversy around them. They were held from us for decades upon decades by, to my understanding, the Vatican. I might be incorrect in that, but let's dive a little bit deeper into what they are. What do they say? And why is it so controversial?
This is a big conversation, Alex, and I'm really happy to begin here. And I'm just going to begin by saying, people hear about the Dead Sea Scrolls. It sounds like something ancient and far off and perhaps irrelevant to our lives today. And this is one of the fascinating things about this kind of history. Are the scrolls ancient? Yes. Are they obsolete? Absolutely not. And the reason for that is because what we're beginning to understand, and those scientists or researchers that follow cycles of human experience, cycles of conflict, cycles of time, is that we are living a continuity of experiences that began long ago, that have direct influence and direct impact, actually give context to what we're seeing in the world today. When I just recently did a live event, we were in Toronto, Canada. Beautiful audience, beautiful people. I was there with a number of other speakers, and people in the audience were asking different questions, but it was the same question. What in the world is going on? Why is it happening? And what can we do to ease the suffering to make our lives better? The conversation you and I are about to have is the underlying answer to all three of those questions. So let's go back a little bit. The Dead Sea Scrolls, they are still a mystery, and they're still being discovered. We have not found all of the scrolls. 1946, 1947, in Qumran, Israel, I think most people have heard the story. A couple of young Bedouin boys were doing something apparently they'd done a million times before. They picked up rocks from the desert floor. They were throwing them at openings in the cliffs, caves. I guess they'd done this a million times. Nothing ever happened. And one day they threw that rock in and it sounded different. It hit something. It struck something inside. So they climbed up and they found the clay vases. And if people haven't ever seen these before, these vases, they're like, they're this big. They're not like little jars, like little mason jars. I mean, these are big clay vases that were sealed. Most of them were sealed, and they contained manuscripts that had not been seen for about 2,000 years. They They were discovered 46, 47. Ultimately, there were 11 caves. And when people ask about these, they say, well, why can't we just see these? Well, first of all, few of them were intact. Many of them were fragments about the size of a postage stamp that has taken years to put together. But where this gets really interesting, they were discovered 46, 47. They were not released to the public, as you mentioned, until early 90s. And the
And that was
question
the
is why.
Va-
There was
and it was the Vatican. That was the Vatican who took ownership.
Well,
Who took
there
ownership?
in the early 90s, I was a member of a scholarly organization. It was called BAR, Biblical Archaeology Review. And
Mhm.
they published a monthly magazine that was describing biblical archaeology in the Middle East and focusing upon the Dead Sea Scrolls. And their lobbying largely is what freed up the scrolls for public access. The Vatican and other religious, or not just the Vatican, but other religious organizations preferred that these scrolls not be made public for a couple
Mhm.
of reasons. Number one, they were the oldest records. They pushed the dates of the documents from the Old Testament back about 1,000 years. So and now we had 1,000 year older versions of Old Testament manuscripts. But what was really important is they were not edited the way
Hmm.
that they had been edited for the the biblical canon, the Bible that we know today, the King James Version and the other many of the other versions. So those two things. So you have to say what could possibly be in those scrolls that would prevent them from being released to the public for 45 years. And the fact that they were unedited, that's a big part of it. But what's relevant to this conversation, Alex, and you can't make this up. I mean, this is what happened in cave number one, the very first cave, the very first vase, one of the first scrolls that was recovered is a scroll that goes by the name of the War Scroll, WAR, the War Scroll. And it was a relatively intact scroll, about 19 columns, if I recall correctly. And it details in just tremendous and vivid language a battle that began a long time ago and is playing out in our lives today. And this is where the continuity comes in. And the exact words from that scroll. This is a battle, an ancient battle between what is called the sons of darkness and the sons of light. When we talk about the sons of darkness and the sons of light, it's not all male. They weren't working with gender at that time the way that we are today. So this is about humans. It's about humankind fighting a battle between good and evil, and the way that that battle plays out. And the scroll describes seven battles that will play out over time. Three are won by the sons of darkness, three are won by the sons of light. That's six. The seventh battle is really interesting and has what many scholars believe direct influence on what's happening and relevance to our lives today. The seventh battle is a battle that is won by the sons of light. It is won, however, through what we call divine intervention and access to human divinity, to our own personal divinity. So people begin to see, what does that mean? I mean, when we hear the word divinity, you and I talked about this a little bit in a previous conversation on your channel. Many people believe that divinity has something to do with religion. And I can see why, because there are schools of divinity that we've all heard of.
Mhm.
Uh, if you look at the definition of divinity, it simply says it's the ability to transcend perceived human limitations, or the ability to transcend perceived limitations. So we break that down. Alex, this is fascinating to me because, first of all, to transcend doesn't mean that we fight and win. It means that we triumph and become more than the battle, number one. Number two, perceived limitations. We all have perceived limitations in our lives that may not even be real. It's our perceptions, our programming that we have been exposed to through our indoctrination into life from our family and our community and our society and religion, science, education, public education. Many places we receive our indoctrination that define what we believe we're capable of and what we're not. Divinity is the ability to transcend those perceived limitations.
We are in a time of great change, and humanity is awakening more and more every day. Mankind needs insights on what is happening to all of us. That is why I'm inviting you to Wisdom from Beyond, a 6-day virtual summit designed to awaken your soul. Experience over 9 hours of soul-expanding channeling sessions led by 6 of the world's most esteemed channelers. Connect with the divine, receive sacred insights, and transform your journey by asking questions directly to the channelers themselves. This is more than just a summit. It is your gateway to understanding the profound shifts happening within and around all of us. Plus, when you sign up, you receive exclusive bonus content to deepen your spiritual exploration. Join us and step into the extraordinary.
When we talk about divinity, divinity is a part of us that appears to be ageless. It's timeless. It is our direct knowing. When something happens in our lives, it's deeply linked to intuition. When something happens in our lives and we absolutely know that something is true, or we know what to do I'll just give an example. There was a time in my life I found myself coming upon the scene of automobile accidents. I was the first one that was there at wee hours of the morning because of where I live in the high desert in northern New Mexico. No cell service, couldn't get 911. I was there. And at that time, I had a general training in first aid, but I wasn't an EMT by any stretch of the imagination. And when I would come upon these accidents, I'd say, help me to serve, help me to be the best version of myself. And I would do what I needed to do to help these people until help would arrive. That is an aspect of divinity. Ultimately, it happened enough. I ended up getting the training. I said, if I'm going to be in this position, I might as well know what to do. So now I've got a small hospital I carry around in my truck, just in case, so that I can be of use. So divinity, it is where our love begins. It's where our healing begins. It's where our forgiveness begins. It doesn't live inside of our physical bodies. Our physical bodies are the biological conduit to a non-physical part of us that science is only beginning to understand. And scientific experiments are now bearing out that we have access to information that doesn't live within us, but it is deeply ingrained within our perception of ourselves. So the scrolls, we're talking about a battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. When we think about a battle, we often think in terms of people fighting in a big field with whatever weapons are available at the time. And they do talk about that in the scroll. But that battle is ongoing right now. And it can be a kinetic battle, Alex. And we're certainly seeing that play out in battlefields of the world, from Ukraine to what we saw happening in Israel on October 7th. Those are examples of kinetic battles. But it's also a psychological battle. And when events unfold and when our perceptions are skewed to the point where we deny our own divinity, that's a form of evil. It is a form of evil for us to sever our relationship with the part of ourselves that makes us whole and complete. So when we alter our biology, or when our biology is altered for us so that we are not able to access information beyond our bodies, that is a form of biological evil. What science is showing, this is fascinating to me, and this ties into the conversation of transhumanism, because the science is showing very, very clearly that we are biological resonators. So every cell in our body functions as transistors and resistors and microcircuits and capacitors and photon emitters and photon receivers. And we store information in DNA as blockchain technology. The blockchain technology of Bitcoin and decentralized finance actually mimics the way that information is stored in human DNA. And it's not an accident that it happens that way. A lot of our technology mimics what we already do in our biology. We've talked about that in other programs. So our biology is what allows us, the quality of our biology determines the quality of our relationship to information in the field. And where this gets even more interesting is, when I was in school back 1950s, 1960s, early 70s, that sounds strange to say, doesn't it?
Well, you look so good for you. I mean, for
Oh, well,
yourself,
thank
sir.
you. Thank you.
That's it.
When I was in school, I was taught that we are frail, powerless,
Hmm.
fragile
Right.
beings that are victims of our external circumstances of our world, and that cells were little more. I mean, people just think of cells as just like soft, gooey, mushy, wet, sticky, stuff in the body. Here's where science is changing, Alex. Science is now looking at the human body from an IT perspective, information technology. And
Mhm.
this is now beginning 1980s is when this started, where they see every cell literally is a microcircuit. And we got 50 trillion cells in the body. We got 50 trillion microcircuits. And every one of those cells does the things that I just mentioned and more. The membrane of the cells have receptors that actually tune to information in the field. And now what the IT conferences are talking about is DNA is actually what is called a fractal antenna. So fractal, and that means that it is able to receive multiple information across a broad spectrum simultaneously. It's not tuned in any one frequency. It's able to receive multiple frequencies across a broad spectrum of
Mhm.
information. And as we change our perceptions, we actually change what's called the conformation, the shape and the function of the DNA, allowing it to tune into different facets of the field. And we do all this on demand at will. We can do this when we choose to do this. So we are in constant communication. We're having a conversation with information that doesn't live inside of us, but we are the conduit for that information. And this is where our creativity comes from, our imagination, our innovation, the insights we get. I had the opportunity a few years ago. I traveled. My wife is a voting member of the Grammys, and she invited me to go to the Grammys, the Grammy festivities that were happening. It was the year they had them in New York,
Mhm.
and of course I went. And I used the opportunity. Every musician, every instrumentalist, every vocalist that I had the opportunity to meet, sometime during a conversation, I would ask them. I'd say, "Wow, where did that music come from? Where did that
Mhm.
piece of music come from?" And you already know what the answer is that I'm going to share here, because all of them told me the same thing. Every one of them said it didn't come from me; it came through me. It came from they're cognizant of this. It came from somewhere else. And they said, I had to get out of the way. I had to get my ego out of the way, my expectations out of the way so that it could flow. And I've worked with scientists all my life, and I've heard the same thing from software engineers. They don't want to just write code. They want to write beautiful and elegant code. And they say there's an intuitive process where they get out of the way in that code, the information, because they're wired to think that way. It flows through them. Artists, writers, when we do relaxation and yoga on a beach or in a forest in nature, and suddenly we have that sense that we are deeply, deeply connected, not separate from all that we see. These are all facets of divinity. So human divinity is us being the best version of ourselves, loving fearlessly. Now, this is powerful because we all know what love is, and we've all loved, and we all know how to love. But how many of us can truly say, Alex, that we at some point in our lives have had the courage to surrender ourselves to another being, another organism, another human, and love without fear in exchange for becoming a better version of ourselves or finding something deeper in that combined love? Often, when you talk to psychologists, when people love, they will love and they always hold a little bit back. There's always the possibility that something's not going to work out. You can't give yourself away. You've always got to hold something back. Divinity frees us from the fear that prevents us from loving fully. Divinity is what allows us to forgive. Many people forgive, and then they look around and say, who just saw me doing that forgiveness? And they're looking for recognition or expecting something to come back. Divinity is forgiving without expectation that something is going to come back. The key to our divinity is that it frees us from the fear that limits us. And fear is the greatest commodity in a world where powers that be want control. Control is only possible when we are in fear of what happens if we don't follow the mandates, if we don't follow the agenda, if we don't follow the policies that are happening there. So for this reason, anything that separates us from our divinity also separates us from the healing of our fear. It keeps us locked in fear, keeps us stuck in fear. That's the ultimate goal of the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. It may manifest as a physical kinetic battle, but the ultimate battle is for our very humanness, because it's through our humanness that we access the field, through the antenna, the DNA, the cell membranes. So the transhuman movement, trans means beyond human. The transhuman movement is the movement to replace portions of our natural biology where those antennae reside with synthetics. Transhuman organs, transhuman tissue is not capable of communicating with our divinity. So you can still be a living being, but you lose access to your divinity because you have surrendered your power, your sovereignty as a human. This is how evil, according to the battle of the sons of darkness and the sons of light, this is one of the ways that evil prevails. So it's a big conversation. I remember when I was a kid, again, growing up in the Midwest, 50s, 60s, we used to talk about good and evil. And it was always like there was a little red devil on your shoulder, and he always looked the same. He had a long pointy tail and he had a couple of pointy horns, and then there was a little angel over here with a halo that wasn't attached. And they were having the conversations back and forth, and we were stuck in between. That was the way good and evil was portrayed. It's more than a metaphor. It's very real, and it's playing out in our lives, and it is playing out in a way that I haven't seen in media, entertainment. I mean, if you've watched some of the performances from some of the music awards and things like that, disguised as art, definitely evil underpinnings, undertones. Many people, if they watch the opening and closing ceremonies of the recent Olympics, we saw imagery there that was mystifying to most people. They just said, what in the world does this mean? Why are we even seeing this? But when you understand the context that we're talking about, it was very clear what was playing out right in front of our faces, right in front of our children, right in front of, mainstream audiences. So it's more than a metaphor. And I think and this is what's important. When people hear this conversation, they say, okay, how do we win? How do you win this battle? Well, I think we're less concerned about winning and more about triumphing. Because when we talk about the winning implies the old idea of force meeting force. That's what keeps us stuck in the suffering and the fear of the world and the hate and the war that we're seeing right now. Triumph is where we've risen above that direct contact. And the way we triumph is by living the best version of ourselves, by living our imagination without fear, our creativity without fear, innovation without fear, loving without fear, forgiveness for the sake of forgiveness. When we do those things, we have triumphed because we are now expressing our divinity in this earth realm. In this world, in this realm, it's through our bodies that divinity comes through. In another realm, it would come through in another way. So this is why our bodies are so important, Alex. And I think this is the reason. And you look at so many of the ancient texts, and people want to attach religion to this. And then because they do that, they want to discount it. So forget about the religion and just think about this conversation. We've been told that our body is the temple. the temple of the soul. Uh, when we talk about ancient temples, this is fascinating to me because inside of the ancient temples of Egypt and Greece and Rome, the innermost sanctum of those temples had a name, and it was called the Holy of Holies. And it was where the most precious part of the information was kept. Within our body temple, we have not one Holy of Holies, but we have 50 trillion Holy of Holies because the nucleus of every cell in our body contains the DNA, the fractal antenna that allows us to access our divine nature, the Holy of Holies. So this
No,
is
great.
where there's a continuity between the past and the present, the ancient and ongoing battle between good and evil, the sons of darkness, the sons of light, and all of the events that we're seeing playing out in our lives and our world today. So I'll stop there and just say that was a long answer to a short question. Does that make sense, what we're saying
It
here?
makes it makes perfect sense, Greg. And the thing that I find fascinating is you've said something so profound that hit me at least, is I never considered the body, the antenna to connect to a higher source. It's so simple, but yet it's because of the programming of the frailty and
Yeah.
oh, we're gonna, all that kind of stuff that I never really thought of it that way. And I think most people don't. Most people
Mm,
don't understand that the food that they eat, the things that they take, the environment that they live in, as far as, toxins and things like that, it affects the ability of the body to be that antenna that connects
yeah.
to their divine and higher self. And I always use the analogy of the cloud. Basically, divinity or the Akashic field, or the Akashic records are it's basically the cloud,
Yeah.
computing beyond what our mainframe could ever handle. It's a connection to a higher source of information, hence the internet, hence this, because our computers are limited. And I always say this head is
Yeah.
a big fat floppy from back in the 80s. And what we're trying to connect to is quantum computing in a very rudimentary explanation. Does that make sense to
It
you?
makes total sense. Two things I'd like to share. First, well, I'm going to share an experiment that was done. It's kind of a mind blower. Uh, those of our viewers who are old enough remember one of the very first computer games that was ever developed
Hmm.
when computers became available to the average person. They weren't just locked up in a big mainframe, air conditioned room somewhere.
Hmm.
They were very primitive desktop computers, big desktop
Hmm.
computers. There was a game called Pong, Pong.
Hmm.
And people look at it today. I mean, I show this in some of our live events. I have a version of it that we show up on the screen, and the young people look at it and they say, what's the big deal? Pong was there
It
was a
was
little
tennis, essentially. It was
yeah,
tennis.
there was a little puck that you would have one player on one side, one on the other side. You'd have a net in the middle, and you would try to get your cursor to hit this thing so it would bounce up and hit the other side. It's so rudimentary today, but I have to tell you, I was working in the industry. I was in the defense industry back in the 80s
Hmm.
when Pong first came out. These were guys, I mean, they were writing software for nuclear triggers during the Cold War for our atomic arsenal. And they come back from lunch and they were mesmerized playing Pong on their computers because we had never seen a game on a computer before.
Hmm.
All
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
So Pong, 2002, a group of scientists did an experiment here in the US. And I wish I didn't know we were going to do this because I would show you the images.
Hmm.
But what they did was they took neurons and put them into a petri dish. All right. So these neurons are free standing neurons in a petri dish. And they developed a very specialized chip so that the dendrites from the neurons could go into little ports on the chip. So now you've got a biological cell connected to a digital chip. And they took that chip and they put it in a computer and they brought up the game of Pong. Well, here's the mind blower. Those neurons began playing Pong, and the longer they played, the better they got. They were
Stop
learning
it.
from their mistakes. All right. Now, so
Stop
here,
it.
here's the questions for the scientists. How does a clump of neurons in a petri dish know how to play the game of Pong? Where are the instructions to play Pong? Well, we know that they're not in the neuron. So the neuron is actually tuning. There's a place in the field where Pong lives, the consciousness of Pong, if you want to call it the Akashic records or
Yeah, sure.
whatever we want to, scientists have acknowledged the field exists. Scientists have acknowledged the field is information and energy, and that we are biological resonators that can tune to different places in that field. So, for example, I'm a guitar player when I'm not doing what we're doing right now. When I want to learn a new, Stephen Vai is one of my guitar heroes. Steve Vai came
Mm.
out. I'm on a documentary with him, by the way, and I'm honored to be on that same documentary.
Yeah, awesome.
Uh, when I want to play Steve Vai, I will go through the motions and it's awkward and it's difficult. And then all of a sudden, I wake up one morning and man, it's just like right there. Or you're trying to learn a new language, you're trying to learn Spanish or French or something like that. And you do it phonetically. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're thinking in Spanish or French, or I tried it in Chinese. It didn't work so well, but it should work. In theory, it should work. So you say, well, why does that happen? Because that language, all of the people who have ever learned that language is in the field, and we are tuning to the field. And where this gets really interesting is that the physics shows, and I'm even making this mistake. The field isn't out there. We are the field. Every one of those 50 trillion cells in our bodies has about 100 trillion atoms. And those atoms, this very instant, are emerging and collapsing into that field in a dance of energy as quanta, little packets of light energy. So that we know that field is there. When the neurons are tuning to that field, they're tuning to the place in the field where Pong resides from all the people who had ever played Pong, from the 1980s on. The reason I share this experiment is because it really helps to anchor the idea that we are biological resonators. The information doesn't live inside of us. Our memories don't live inside of us. We are the antenna, for lack of a better term, that tune in resonance to the place in the field where that information lives. I mentioned I was born in Missouri. I was born right on the edge of Missouri, very near the Kansas-Missouri border, and right across the border was University of Kansas. And when Einstein died, I was coming into the world about the time Einstein was leaving the world. And I always like to think maybe we passed in the ethers somewhere. I don't know.
Hmm. Right, right.
And I wish I'd spent some time with him. But when he died, they sent his brain to the
Hmm.
University of Kansas because they wanted to find out what made him different, what set him apart from everyone else. And they thin sliced his brain. And what they found was his brain looked like everybody else's brain, with one exception. There was one exception. He had way more folds in his brain than a lot of people do. Now, when you think about this, if the neurons are the antenna, all right, and you've got more folds in the brain, if you take that brain and you stretch it out, more folds means there's more surface area. So he had more surface area, more antenna to tune to the field, maybe in ways that we're only beginning to learn to do. Uh, but this is where ancient traditions, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and the wisdom of our past, and this battle between good and evil, and transhumanism, and the new discoveries of human potential all come together, Alex, in a really beautiful way. So we are soft technology, literally
Hmm.
soft technology. We're not silicon and computer chips and chemicals and wires. We're neurons and cell membranes and ion potentials moving across the cell walls, and we self-regulate through thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, and focus, all the spiritual practices. We self-regulate this soft technology. And when we're at our best, it's because we are in resonance. We're tuned with this part of us that we call our divinity that
Hmm.
allows us to transcend perceived limitations. The evil is what in separating us from that divinity so that we are prevented from being the best version of ourselves. Without that, we become fearful because now we feel like we don't have the power in our lives to take care of ourselves. And that's where life looks scary. The better you know yourself, the less you fear change in the world.
Right.
And that's the whole purpose of this conversation.
Greg, let me ask you this because this idea again of the body being the antenna, I can't, it's such a simple idea. I can't believe I've never thought about this in this way, but you've shined a light on it, at least for me. The If you start analyzing the avatars who've walked this planet before us, the yogis and the masters, many of them, at least that we know of, had a very basic diet, a very simple,
Yeah.
I mean, for lack of a better word, organic diet back in the days before the chemicals, before all of the things that are going on. Do you believe that, in addition to their own practices, allowed their bodies to be optimized to a level where they can receive not only receive information but elevate their frequency at a certain level? Because if let's say you're drinking alcohol a lot, and hey, I'm not against anyone taking a sip of wine here or
Sure.
there, maybe even a shot if you like, but generally speaking, we all know that's poison. I mean, it is what it is. It's poison. It might be fun poison, but it's poison nevertheless.
Yeah.
There is a deeper a negative charge to eating or drinking or conceiving that kind of food, and it brings your frequency down. It's almost impossible. I can't say for sure, but it seems to me that just basic on basic math, putting in that much kind of negative frequency, let's say by the foods you're eating, and let's say they're chemical laden and all of that other stuff, versus having much more of an organic, closer to the earth
Sure.
diet, that you can raise your frequency a lot easier than if you're eating poorly, eating processed foods, eating all of that stuff. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes tremendous sense. And people ask sometimes, what is an optimum diet? I mean, we could go through
Oh, it's
all,
forever. Yeah, sure.
yeah, you could do
It's a
this
thousand.
when the way I typically respond to that, there are a number of books
Hmm.
from our biblical canon that were edited in the fourth century. You've talked with guests about this on your awesome program. I've
Thank
listened to
you.
some of those conversations, and I've learned a lot from some of your guests. Some of those books were written by the Essenes.
Hmm.
And the Essenes are believed to be the scribes for the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're not sure if they actually originated the scrolls, but they definitely penned the version of the scrolls that is found in Qumran. The scrolls may have come from somewhere else, and there's a lot of controversy about that right now. DNA study of the parchment is showing that the parchment is not from the Middle East. So that's one of the big questions. Did the parchment come from somewhere else, and then they wrote on the Middle East, or did the scrolls and the writing were they created somewhere
Mm.
else and brought into Qumran? So whole conversation there. But the Essenes are believed to be those scribes. And there are some of the Essene texts are records of the words of Jesus of Nazareth as his disciples are asking him the same questions that we're asking each other right now. And there is a conversation where they said, Master, what is it that we use to nourish our bodies? And what he said 2,000 years ago is so clear, so clean, so precise. It's the way I like to answer the question today. And he simply said this. He said, those foods, he said, the foods that are alive and come from the life of the earth give life to your body, and the foods which are dead will create death in your body. Therefore, eat foods that bring life to your body. And that's pretty straightforward. The closer we can get the food to its natural source, the
Hmm.
more enzymes, the more alive the enzymes, the life force, if you will. There is a pranic component to food, to real food, is very different than foods. I mean, there are foods on the grocery store shelf that have never seen the light of day, that they have been completely created inside of the machine and processed. Will they fill your stomach so you're not hungry? Well, the answer is yes. Are they giving you the nutrients that give life to your body? That's questionable. Depends on what they are. So I think the food is important. And at the same time, Alex, I think it's important. We don't want to give our power away to the food. because we're more than that food. It's the feeling that we have, the fear of what we're eating or the love of what we're eating. Something very interesting happens when you begin to think about the things that we're talking about from this perspective. I think probably the greatest level of mastery that we are asked or invited to attain in this lifetime is to protect and preserve the gift of our bodies, the gift of our humanness, that we are led to take for granted and led to discount. And young people are being taught that we are actually a flawed species, that we need technology, we need AI and computer chips in our brain and chemicals in our skin. That's what our young people are being taught. So I think as we embrace the deep truth of what it means to be human and the gift of what humanness means, and all the ways that science is supporting that, really interesting things begin to happen. And one of those things is that the foods that we used to be drawn to, we may not be drawn to them anymore because they just don't taste the same, knowing
Hmm.
that they're not good for us.
Hmm.
And it's not like an effort. It's a natural consequence of embracing a deeper respect for the gift of life and the gift of the human body. And I say that intentionally. It is a gift because the science tells us very clearly we are not the product of Darwin's idea of evolution. Evolution, as a geologist, as a degree geologist, I believe in evolution. I've seen it in the fossil record when I was in school. We recovered evolutionary processes and fossilized remains for plants and animals and insects. But the theory breaks down when it comes to us humans because
Right.
something happened 200,000 years ago. And there were not just one, but a series of mutations that didn't
Hmm.
happen slowly, gradually over a long period of time. They happen in a very compressed period of time, and they are vital mutations that give us our humanness. We've talked about these in some of your earlier programs that our viewers may not maybe have seen those programs, but chromosome 2,
Hmm.
perfect example, is the product of fusing two pre-existing chromosomes, fully intact chromosomes together, and then going through and adding or deleting or silencing genes to stabilize that fusion. And you say, okay, what's the big deal about chromosome 2? Well, it's what's responsible for our neocortex. About 80% of our neocortex, this is where our mirror neurons come from. This is where our the ability to tune to this field of divinity comes from. Chromosome 7 gives us complex speech. It's the reason we can sing and have a conversation, whereas a chimpanzee that is only separated by 2% of our DNA, 98% of our DNA we share with a chimp. 2%
Hmm.
difference. You're never going to hear a chimp singing Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. I don't think. Or if you
It's
do,
not.
I want to know. I want to know about it. No,
Absolutely, and
but
book that guy on a show because he's going to make
yeah,
some money.
he is, and I would love to see that. But these kinds of mutations, scientists tell us, cannot happen under natural conditions. There was some kind of, as a scientist, I have to say there's some kind of intervention. I can't say with scientific certainty who or what. The archaeology tells us the stories, whether you're talking about Sumerians or Navajo or Aboriginals or the Inca, or the Christians or the Islamic traditions, they all tell a story of how it happened. Not one of them says it's the product of slow, gradual change over a long period of time. All of them say there was some kind of an intervention. That's not scientific. What is scientific is that these mutations exist and we can now identify them. The scientists say that when the odds of something happening are 10 to the 400th, so 10 to 400 zeros, when the odds of that are 10 to the 400th, that something is impossible. So if you had a
Hmm.
lottery ticket and they tell you, it's 10 to the 400th or the odds of this, you might as well just, you know, probably forget it. The scientists say that the odds of these mutations happening are 10 to the 600th. So if 10 to the 400th is impossible, 10 to the 600th means it's more than impossible that these are from natural processes. There's some kind of intervention. We were tweaked 200,000 years. We've only been here for 10,000 generations. That's really not that long. 10,000 generations. You figure a generation is about Statistically, it's about 20 years, what they consider a generation for reproduction. So we've only been here 10,000 generations, and we were given the gift of this body through those mutations so that we can access and refine our relationship to these divine, what we call divine principles that give us our humanness.
So, Greg, let me ask you then, if we weren't, if we did not evolve in the way that that science told us originally, and that we were messed with in one way, shape, or form, this sounds very reminiscent of the Sumerian story, one of the oldest
Yeah.
stories in known through humanity at this point, of the Anunnaki, and this kind of story of that kind of coming into us, messing with us, playing with us. This concept of junk DNA, which
Yeah.
I find fascinating, because if anybody who's ever been just watched his nature, there's no junk involved. Everything is a beautifully, perfectly orchestrated dance, but yet we have junk DNA in us. Can you explain I've talked about the Anunnaki in nauseum on the show, but can you touch a little bit upon what that story is and your point of view on that story, and how interreacts with us?
Yeah, I am happy to do that. I was blessed in the 90s and 2000s. I toured with some of the most brilliant researchers and scientists. Ed Mitchell,
Mhm.
uh, former astronaut, sixth man to walk on the moon. Michio Kaku, the physicist, who I don't know if you've had him on the program, but he's a brilliant protege of Einstein's theories and works in string theory and taking it to the next level. And Zecharia Sitchin. I had the opportunity to tour with him in Egypt and the UK. He was a brilliant man. He was a brilliant scholar. He was the first that really took the time to translate the cuneiform scripts. Cuneiform is a very unique, I'm going to call it a writing system. It's not an alphabet. It's not like you take a bunch of cuneiform symbols and put them together to make a word. Each symbol can mean its own word or its own concept. And he was the one largely responsible for formulating the idea, bringing it to the mainstream of the idea of the Anunnaki, of Nibiru, the planet 3,600 year. His theory was that there is another planet in our solar system that we are, I'm hesitating, I don't know how deep we're going to get into this, that we
Mhm.
are publicly not aware of, that some
Mhm.
researchers are aware of it. And the reason we're not aware of it is because it has an orbit that is different than the ecliptic of the orbits: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. They're all kind of, when you look at them in relationship to the sun, they're along the same line, the ecliptic. And this Nibiru orbit is an oblong orbit that is offset, and it takes about 3,600 years to make one complete orbit. And every 3,600 years, uh, according to Sitchin, he felt like they'd stop by, check on us, see how things are going, and then go away for another 3,600 years. That and I think there's a lot of truth to what he was saying. He and I don't agree necessarily with every facet of his theory in this sense. He believed that we were created for the purpose of being a slave species.
Mhm.
I think it's certainly possible, and the evidence supports that we have been enslaved in the past. I don't know that that is the only purpose, if that's the reason for our origin. So it was the Anunnaki, according to Sitchin and others since then, that were responsible for the genetic manipulations that we see today. The archaeological evidence of the Anunnaki, among the mysteries, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, is something called the King's List
Mhm.
of rulers on the earth from the periods of time that Sitchin is talking about. It goes back about 400 and a little 428,000 years, I believe. I don't have, I wasn't sure we're going to talk about this, and I don't have that with
Mhm.
me. I'm doing this off the top of my head. about
Hmm.
428,000 years. What is very controversial? The King's List is it's a stela. It's a cubic stela that lists all of the rulers. What's interesting is from the time of the Great Flood, which they accurately depict in the King's List, forward into what we call history, as opposed to prehistory. This King's List is right on. It identifies the rulers, their names, the beginning date of their rule, the end date of their rule, so we know how long they were ruling. It's right on. The controversy is before the flood, it gives the names of the kings, and the beginning and the ends of the dates are astronomical numbers. They're in thousands of years, tens of thousands of years for one ruler. And so scientists are saying, well, they made this stuff up, because nobody can rule for thousands of years, or people can't live for thousands of years. They're assuming that these were humans. And I think that's a big assumption to be made. There are theories that say those lengths of time were not in Earth years, that they were in Nibiru years. So that would help to explain why those lengths of time, their year around the sun is much longer than our 365-day journey around the sun, which is what our year is based on. So it could be that before the flood, they were basing those times on their planet's time frame, and after that, the flood on Earth, it was based on ours. But the genetic manipulation, the way that this is where it's called forensic DNA. You take what we have today and you reverse engineer it. You go backwards and say, what had to happen to get to the DNA that we have today? And what had to happen is something that we could not do until the 2000s, when we had what's called genetic engineering through
Hmm.
editors like CRISPR technology, which
Hmm.
is gene editing. Our DNA appears to have been gene edited. So the question is, who had gene editing technology when we appeared 200,000 years ago? And the truth is, and scientists don't like this, the truth is we don't know. We don't have the answer. But here's where I've worked with scientists all my life. I was first in academia, then in the corporations, and now as an author and a researcher. And Alex, there's a huge difference. I'm going to make a comparison here. There's a huge difference between taking discoveries that are made, revelations, and forcing them to fit into a pre-existing story,
Hmm.
and taking new discoveries and following those discoveries to the story that they tell. It's a huge difference. The tendency is for scientists to take new discoveries, including genetic manipulations, including evolution, and these things, and force it into Darwin's theory of evolution. It's like a square peg in a round hole. We've all heard that.
Hmm.
Now, you can get the square peg into the round hole, but it's never going to be a good fit. There's going to be places, empty spaces where it doesn't fit well. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The evidence doesn't support Darwin's theory of evolution. And it implied, now the genetic evidence implies some kind of an intervention, some kind of a genetic manipulation. This is where science is stuck, because most scientists say that science is not equipped to go down that road. Because if you say there has been an intervention, that implies an intentionality, that
Hmm.
implies a purpose. That is a very, very different story. So the good news is that there's a new generation of academics, a new generation of college professors that are a little bit more open-minded. The old guard is holding on to the old story, um, and they're dying off. And the new generation, they are healthy skeptics, but they are open to new possibilities. And I think this is the way science works, because the
Hmm.
evidence, until we could look at the DNA, Darwin's idea, that was it. And it doesn't discount Darwin's idea for all other forms of life. We're not denying evolution. We're just saying that evolution, something else happened when it comes to humans.
Greg, let me ask you. There's this idea with, and you said it with the Sumerians Kings list. The academics or scholars would just say, "Oh, they were just making that up," or the Sumerian texts talking about the Anunnaki, that whole talk, oh, that's just stories. I love to hear, this is what I always say. I love to hear what you think. For you and me to sit down right now and make up a story, fairly easy to us to do. We sit down, we type on a keyboard. In a matter of seconds, we can come up with
Right.
a story. Back in the day, to get a piece of stone, to go in there and start chiseling things out, it's not like you just woke up one morning, you know what? I think I'm just going to make up the history of humanity just for fun. It doesn't seem to make any logical sense
No.
for it just makes that's such a weak argument. So to be said, all right, so if that's the case, then what they are writing down, they believe to be true. It could be stories that were passed on to them and it's their own propaganda that someone is sitting down and doing. But why do you think first of all, do you agree with what I'm saying? And secondly, why do you think they would sit down and put this on stone, something that was going to be as permanent as they could put back then?
I'm in agreement with you. It's not an easy task necessarily. I mean, once you learn it, I'm sure you get used to it. But cuneiform is not an easy language to record. If anyone has ever seen cuneiform, and what's interesting, it is a writing system from which Sanskrit is derived, and Biblical Hebrew is derived, and Arabic are all derived. Those three languages that arguably uh, we refer to for the most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, the Buddhist traditions and the Hindu traditions in Sanskrit and
Mhm.
the Arabic and the Hebrew languages. They're all the common link for all of those is cuneiform. So, and it was not an easy language. If I was in my other office, I've got cuneiform tablets. I'd put one up, and I don't have one in here, so someone
No
could
worries.
see what a cuneiform tablet looks like. But I think one of the things, the story is still unfolding. And I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the past is ancient, it's not obsolete. We are living the continuity of a story. We're writing a new chapter in the human story. And according to some people, it might be one of the final chapters in our story as we become a very different species. And there's a whole conversation behind that. There's a piece of this story, I think, Alex, that we'll probably see in our lifetimes over the next couple of years
Mhm.
that is going to tell the tale and seal the deal. And that is, I worked in the corporations during the Cold War years. And the Cold War, and I worked in the defense industry, not by choice. I was working, I believed that I was going to be assigned to cosmological exploration with a company that built the spacecraft that went to places like Mars and went to Jupiter. And that's what I applied for. They hired me, and then they said, well, we're in the Cold War. We need you on this side of the house temporarily to support the defense industry. And there's a whole story about what I went through around that and my soul searching uh, and I learned a lot in that industry. And one of the things that was really interesting, the Cold War was what's called a civilized war because we were at war politically, certainly with the former Soviet Union and the former United States, because neither country is the same anymore.
Very true.
So, yeah, so we were at war politically, but scientifically, there was a lot of cooperation. And
Mhm.
scientists were still working and exploring and cooperating. I mean, Russia and America built a space station,
Mhm.
and we share that space station. So, on a scientific level, there's a lot of cooperation. Well, at that time, Russia and America were the only two superpowers that had the money and the technology to go to other planets. And there was an agreement that was made, even though we were at war. There was an agreement that we would not share what we found on those planets. And that agreement has largely been honored.
Mhm.
Now, both countries are almost too broke, and our energy is tied up in other things. We're not the ones going back to these planets. Now, countries like India and China
Mhm.
are going
Mhm.
back to the moon. They are not part of that agreement. They never agreed not to share. China has said when their manned probe lands on the lunar surface, that they will broadcast live what they find on the lunar surface. Well, what are they going to find? our photographs, beginning with the Clementine missions to Mars, all the way back to Clementine. We went there, I'm sorry, to the moon. To Clementine is to the moon. We went looking for microbes, searching for microbes and bacteria and evidence of life, not expecting that there would be archaeological remnants of past civilizations on the surface of the moon. And that's what was found, and we have the photographic evidence of that. So when the Chinese land, and if they keep their promise and they beam back the live images of archaeological remnants on the lunar surface, 50,000 years old and older, I think we're going to write the new chapter to this story. Because a lot of people say, okay, when they think about temples on the moon, must be aliens, ETs, extraterrestrials, and it very well could be. But I think there's a good chance, and there's a big conversation we can have around this. What they're going to find is those temples are our temples that we left for ourselves a long time ago when we worked together and cooperated and created great and beautiful things as a species before we destroyed those things through war. And we're living that cycle again. And the reason I'm saying this now is the writing that they find on those temple walls, I think, is going to be familiar languages, including cuneiform, including Sanskrit, including Hebrew and Arabic. I would not be surprised at all to see very familiar languages on those temple walls that we find on the lunar surface. And then look at the timing. Here we are as a planet, more polarized, more fractured than we have been arguably in recent history, not just in my lifetime, but in recent history. What would it mean to find evidence that we collectively have achieved such great and beautiful things in the past? And if we work together, how much further could we go this time? And that could be a catalyst to bring us together when there are so many factors that are trying to drive us apart. And I think you're going to see it happen within just the next couple of years because they're on their way to the moon.
Well, Greg, and I'm already seeing how this is going to play out. Let's say China goes to the moon. Let's say China goes, hey, here's a video. Look, we just found this temple. How many people are going to go, this is fake news,
Mhm.
this is not real, because we're so divided and we can't even trust our
Yeah.
media anymore. Would you agree that that's a possibility?
It is very much a possibility. And the reason for that, we are we are living a time when there is a concerted effort to divide us, and that's no secret. I
Right.
mean, we all can see that happening, and it's happening in a number of ways. Because when the social bonds are broken that keep us together, we become more vulnerable to the ideas and the agendas of of others, and there's no shortage of ideas and agendas out there to push us in one direction or another. Again, I'm hesitating. I don't know how deep we want to go. Do you want to take a little dive on this one, Alex?
Go for
You
it.
okay if we do that?
I love to go deep diving with you, Greg. So go for it.
Well, I do as well, and I appreciate that. And I just want to honor you and the channel. But
Mhm.
I think I mentioned I lost my mom to COVID, and it was the first year. It was in 20, the very end of 20. I lost my mom to COVID, and even before she died, she looked at the world and she said to me, "Greg, I don't know what's happening." She said, "I've never seen the world like this." Her term was a very old-fashioned term. She said, "The world is going to hell in a handbasket," was the
Fantastic.
term. I totally get the going to hell part. The handbasket part, I wasn't sure, but I knew what she was saying, because to my mom, it looked to her like the world was falling apart at the seams for no apparent reason, just coming unglued randomly, spontaneously. The way we began this conversation, Alex, sets the stage and provides the context. It's not random and it's not spontaneous. We are living the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. People can make of that whatever they want. It is a battle between good and evil. And it is a very real battle. It's not a metaphor, a very real battle. It's not an ancient battle between super beings with swords on the top of the Empire State Building. It's not necessarily a battle playing out with tanks and rockets, although it can be, but it is a battle for our very humanness, because our humanness is the link to our divinity. Our divinity is really what's at stake right here. Because without the divinity, we are more vulnerable to the agendas and the ideas of others because we are in fear. So part of this battle that's playing out now is very sophisticated. Now, I think that's not a surprise to anyone here. It's called fifth generation warfare, 5Gen or 5GW. This isn't 5G cell phone towers. It's called fifth generation warfare. Fifth generation warfare is an insidious warfare, Alex, that plays out in the mind. It is a battle of perception and information that plays out in the mind. And that is precisely what we're happening. I'm going to give some specifics, a couple of ways this happens. One, I think it's very obvious that there is a concerted effort to divide us. It's always been, but because technology has advanced, we now have ways of doing it through social media, for example, and the algorithms that feed and reinforce information to your YouTube channel, for example, that may be very different than what I'm seeing on mine. And then you and I get together over lunch, and you think that your YouTube channel is right, and I think that mine's right, or a family gets together at dinner and the kids think their YouTube channel is right, and the parents are seeing something different. This divides, and we're seeing it happen. I'm seeing it happen between husbands and wives. I'm seeing partnerships splintered and fractured in this political season because of this. So it's always happened. It really picked up speed around 2011. And I think if people think back, there was something called the Occupy movement. And a lot of people were on the front end of that, and they thought, man, this is a really cool thing. I caught a lot of heat from people that said, why aren't you supporting the Occupy movement? And it was difficult for me to answer that because the context that I'm about to share was not commonly known. So people didn't get it. So here's what happened. Occupy movement targeted the rich and the poor, which is a very real discrepancy. It needs to be addressed in a healthy way to heal our society. I'm totally with that. What was happening is it was weaponized to divide us and continues to be today. And so that primal sense of what was happening was weaponized to divide us. Now, I'm going to tell you exactly how it was done. I made a couple of notes here. I didn't know for sure we were going to talk about this. 1971, a book came out by a man named Saul Alinsky. Have you talked about Alinsky much on this program?
I have not.
I know some of your viewers, and I'm not saying he was what he said was accurate. It's the way it's been applied. All right. The title of the book was Rules for Radicals. So let me share the 4 steps to create the division that he identified, and then let's see how it applies to what we're seeing in our world right now. He said, when you want to create social change, when you want to break a system, he said, you pick the target, you isolate the target, you polarize the target, and you personalize the target. All right. So the target was the discrepancy between the rich and the poor. It's very real. It's a real target. You isolate it. All of a sudden, all the media was all focused. The media in the United States, as many different outlets as we have right now, I believe there's 6 corporations. Two of them merged. I believe it's 6 corporations that own all of the major media outlets. So they are sharing common language, common perceptions, and common viewpoints. All right. So all of a sudden, that is the isolate. Everybody's talking about it. Every news cycle, they're talking about discrepancy between rich and the poor. Nobody's paying taxes here. These guys are paying tax, all that. Then they polarize it and they make the distinction and make it them and us. And then they personalize it about how bad our lives are. That's what happened in 2011. So does that make sense so far?
So far, it sounds like the playbook that Hitler used.
Well, it comes from divide and conquer,
Yeah.
which was in the late 1700s, was when the philosophers began to identify that. It was used early in the 20th century. Saul Alinsky formalized it, but now look what happened. So that was 2011. Then they took the same thing and they did it between blacks and whites. There are discrepancies. We do need to talk about them in a healthy way to bring our society together. Those primal divisions that go right to the gut were
Hmm.
weaponized to divide us. It's still happening. Then Christians against Muslims, and then Jews against Muslims, and then men against women, and then adults against children. And now what's happening is we are breaking the social bonds deeper and deeper and deeper levels to the point where within an individual, now gender is on the line, a very real conversation. We need to have it in a healthy way. It's been weaponized to divide us. This is how you break a society. All right. You break those social bonds little by little by little by little. And then you inundate people with so much information. Some of it's true, some of it's false, misinformation, disinformation, fake information, AI generated information. And pretty soon people don't feel connected to their families or to their friends or to their society. And now they don't even know who to trust because the information, they don't know what information to trust. That is where society becomes very vulnerable, very vulnerable. Same thing has happened with climate. Same thing is happening with the war in the Middle East. Same thing is happening with the war in Ukraine. All need to be talked about. The point is, they're real issues that have been misused and weaponized to divide us rather than a genuine effort to solve them and bring us together as a society. So this is fifth generation warfare. It's psychological. It can lead to kinetic war if the perceptions are deeply broken and strong enough, and the differences are great enough. It can be physical, it can be kinetic, but it begins on this insidious psychological level where, and now religion, the religions are being broken as well. People, that was like the last bastion. People have turned to religion. Now there is information is being shared that is breaking individuals' relationship to religion, trying to. And some people, it's driving them deeper into their religion to the point of extreme, and other people, it is just fractured the whole thing. Fifth generation warfare, this is how this is a function of the sons of darkness and sons of light, good and evil, separating us from our own divinity.
Well, Greg, it seems that every all these systems that you're talking about, and even just things that we thought were just institutions that could never be faulted, religion. As a recovering Catholic, I always talk about the Vatican, and I always talk about the Catholic Church. That when I was growing up, I mean, there's nothing that could do wrong, and yet obviously there's things that have come out over the last few decades. The cracks have been showing in that specific religion, let's say, or that institution. But same thing for healthcare, same thing for the economy, same thing for media. All of these, Hollywood is where I, spent 30 years of my career in. And
Mm.
it was an institution. No one could have ever thought that
Yeah,
Hollywood could ever not be the way you and I remember it. I think it peaked pretty much, I think in the 90s, early 2000s was the peak of it. And then it's been doing this kind of slow decline ever since that really in 2020 it was a knockout punch and it has not recovered since the pandemic. Um, how how do you see these institutions and why do you see these institutions? And it's not just one, it's all of them. I mean, the movies that are coming out today
yeah,
are just so
yeah.
divisive, so for lack of a better word, woke in some areas and on both sides, either one all the way to the left or all the way to the right. It's just so divided. When I was coming up in the 80s and 90s, movies were fun.
Yeah.
Movies were, they had enjoyment, they were entertainment, but now it's everything's political. Everything is this, everything is that. Why do you think that turn has happened within media specifically?
The answer to that is the way we began this program. This is part of that fundamental battle. We are barreling down a path of a cycle, the convergence of cycles. And it's not that the cycle ends on a dime, but there's a window of time. And for a number of reasons, the powers that be have identified the year 2030 as that window of time. the end of a number of different cycles converging, whether we're talking about geologic cycles or financial cycles, economic cycles. Human conflict occurs in cycles with the rise and fall of magnetic fields and
Hmm.
solar
Hmm.
influence. Scientists know this. Uh, Cosmologic cycles, a lot of things converging in the year 2030. The United Nations has identified this year as when they want to meet what are called the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 principles of social engineering that they propose to remake this world in a way that they feel is going to be better for some people. There's a whole program we could do on those
Hmm.
things. The point is that that time frame has been identified, and what you're seeing, Alex, is the powers that be are jockeying for position to be in the best place as this cycle unwinds, or as it comes to a close. To be in the best position and the need to control information is one tactic to get where they're hoping to go. The need to control the narrative on climate, for example, or the need to control the narrative on green energy. I mean, this is another example. We we have had the technology to create clean, green,
Hmm.
sustainable energy that in a way that can't be weaponized, can't be made into a bomb, can't melt down like a Fukushima reactor, is abundant on every continent of the earth, is inexpensive, where the waste becomes the cycle that goes into the fuel. We've had that for 70 years. We have had these sources of energy. If they were really serious about this, those sources of energy would not have been suppressed the way that they have been. And that's just one example. So what you're seeing is the need to control information to create the narratives so that we, the people, believe in certain policies to the point where we are the ones that are crying for the changes based on the misinformation that we have been fed, and changes that may not actually serve us, may not actually be good for us. That's evil. That is a form of, it's not, you know, swords and shields and warriors on the battlefield. It's the battlefield of the mind. And it's insidious because what it does is it breaks down the self-image of individuals. I was just with a group of young people at one of our events, and I was asking questions about the future. And Alex, I want to tell you, and this isn't true for all young people, but there was a segment of a community in our audience in their 20s. And they felt that there is no future for them. They can't think about the future because they don't think there is a future. They don't think the world is going to last that long. If it does last that long, they don't think that they have a place in it. And for that reason, when they think about their bodies, they don't think about their bodies in terms of decades down the road. They think about their bodies in terms of what feels good, what looks good, what brings me pleasure right now. And I'm not judging it right, wrong, good, or bad. What I'm saying is that the information campaign has led an entire segment of our population to to not even think about a family, not even
Hmm.
think about their role of supporting society and the community and contributing whatever it is they're going to contribute through art or music or scientific innovation or discoveries or whatever it is. They're not thinking along those lines. That's very different. When you and I were kids, and there's a difference in our age, but even in our generation, we at least had a future and we felt
Hmm.
certain enough that there would be a future
Oh yeah.
that was there. There is a future. And there is a time we're going to get through all of this and we're going to get through this together. And you and I are going to do one of these programs and we're going to look back and we're going to say, wow, that was a ride. What I think is important for people to know, all these things are happening. I think we've all heard that knowledge is power. And maybe we've heard it so much we don't give it much credence. Lack of knowledge is lack of power. Knowing that our perceptions are up for grabs and that we are casualties of fifth generation warfare. gives us the opportunity to be aware and cognizant. When we hear something that frightens us, we owe it to ourselves. Is that true? We've heard esteemed leaders tell us Earth only has 10 years left. We don't, if we don't change the way we eat, the way we heat our food, the way we provide transportation for ourselves, the way we power the planet, our planet is gone in 10 years. And that's not a metaphor. I mean, they are saying that with passion, and young people believe that to such a degree that it empowers them, Alex, to go and vandalize in their communities anything that they think is stealing their future. They feel justified in doing that. That's the danger of this misinformation. So when you hear things like that, what I think we're all asking ourselves to do is unplug from the spell, the God spell of technology, unplug from that spell. You can listen, go to alternative sources of information. When you can, go to the direct source. If it's a scientific principle, don't listen to a commentator on network television give their interpretation. Go to the scientific papers. Go to the direct interviews people like you do with the scientists that don't have a vested interest in those outcomes.
Right.
Ultimately, our divinity allows us deep intuition. We haven't even talked about that in this program. But there is in our heart, we literally have 40,000 specialized sensory neurites in the heart, discovered in 1991, that tune to the field. And when we learn to access that without going through the fear of the mind, bypass the mind and go to the heart, we know what's true for us. And we know what's good for our bodies, and we know what's good for our children, and we know what's good for our community, even if it's different than what we're being told through some media silo, information silo that's coming to us. So in different ways, we're all being pushed to become the best version of ourselves. And when we live the deep truth of what it means to be human, and we live the fullness of our divinity, we imagine freely, we love without fear, we forgive without expectation of something coming back, we innovate, we create without fear. And even when we fight, if we fight for our love of what we know is possible, that's very different than fighting from our hate or our fear of what's in front of us. On a soul level, it makes a tremendous difference. What motivates us? Do we make our choices from the love of what we know is possible because we trust in ourselves and our divine capacities? Or do we do it because we're afraid of what happens if we don't? And that's a question we each can ask ourselves. I ask myself that question all the time. If I'm going to have a tough conversation on a business call and I've got some real strong feelings, I will ask myself, am I sharing this for my love of this person, my love of this world, my love of what I know is possible? Or is this retribution, anger, hate, and fear, which is what the media is trying to push us into? It's an election year, and we're seeing that big time. We're seeing that big time. So go directly to the sources and ask yourself, is it true? And begin to discern the information and unplug from those media silos, those algorithms that keep us locked, just keep feeding us and reinforcing one belief system. Step out a little bit and explore some other sources of information, other sources of media. I know we're running close. Can I just give one example?
Please.
I'm going to give an example of this. You and I talked about this a little bit on a previous program. October 7th is a perfect example of what I'm talking about here, what happened in Israel. I was speaking at a conference in London on October 7th. There was 8 hours time difference, well, 7 hours between mountain states and where I was. And I was getting ready to go on stage, and I was seeing the media feeds, the raw feeds coming in from Asia, Eastern Europe, and parts of the Middle East, showing what had happened, and it was horrendous. By the end of the day, I went back to my hotel room, and now CNN, because of the time difference, I was able to pick up CNN, and some of the US stations. What America, I'm going to say this, America was not allowed to see what actually happened on October 7th. I hope that's the date that I just said. It was October 7th. America was not allowed to see what happened Two reasons. One, it didn't fit a narrative. And number two, the algorithms, the community guidelines would not allow those horrendous images to be shown on American social media. Okay. And you say, okay, what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. Americans and young people in America reacted to what happened based on what they were allowed to see, and what they didn't see, they said didn't happen. They denied that so many of those atrocities actually occurred. They said, because if they did occur, I would have seen them on
Mm.
social media. Therefore, they didn't occur. So now you've got a movement of young people on college campuses based on partial information. I'm not say it was wrong, but it wasn't complete. And they were motivated by that misinformation. And that's the power of being able to control that narrative. And that's one recent real life example of where these kind of things come up. So you have to it's out there. You just have to really look for it and know how to navigate into other spaces to be able to see, the truth of what happened. And that's just, one big example, but it plays out in other ways, whether we're talking about climate, the financial
Mhm.
industry, the banking industry, healthcare, whatever it is.
Greg, as you know, I could continue talking to you for 4 or 5 more hours, and we will hopefully have you in studio soon next year to sit down and do even a deeper dive than we did today. So I appreciate you so much for coming on the show. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions that I ask all my guests, and you answered some of these before. I
All
want to
right.
see how your answers have changed.
Okay, I'm
What
ready.
is your what is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Fulfilled life is embracing the fullness of our divinity, of my divinity, the ability to love fully,
Mhm,
fearlessly,
mhm.
forgive without expectation, to not be afraid to imagine, to create, to innovate, and to share those imaginations, those innovations, and those creations with love with the world.
If you had a chance to go back in time and speak to little Greg, what advice would you give him?
Little Greg, you never asked me that one, I don't think. What I would say, well, I'll preface this. And I've shared this before. I'm the product of a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family
Mhm.
where the abuser, my father, said things uh, to my brother and my mom and myself to make us feel small and insignificant. And what I would say to little Greg is, don't believe those things. Don't believe the things that make you feel small and insignificant.
How do you define God or source?
God or source is that, I think the definition is in the name. Source is the origin of all things. And that is the source of all that exists, not a man in the sky
With a long
as
beard.
with a big beard, but as the origin of all things that are possible and all things that are not possible in this world. I think that is, I'm hesitating because it's opening into a really deep conversation between the God of the Bible and the true God of
Oh,
Source.
and we will talk about that in our next conversation. That's such a great
All
topic to
right.
jump into. What is love?
Love is the fuel of the universe. Love is the fire that of passion that lights us up and allows us to look into the eyes of one another and recognize one another and who we are and why we're here and where we've come from and what's possible in our lives when we work together, and what's possible in our lives when we share our own light and when we shine to the best of our ability on our own in this world. That's love.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
I think the ultimate purpose of human life, I'm going to refine this, many forms of life. I think the ultimate purpose of human life is to reclaim our divinity.
And where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world, sir?
People go to the website, greggbraden.com, www.greg, G-R-E-G-G, Braden, B-R-A-D-E-N.com, and all of our live events. I've got a new book coming out December of this year. We'll talk about that book when I come and see you, and I will be sitting across from you in the studio
Yes, you
in
will on the other
yeah,
side.
in
Yes.
just a few weeks, and I'm looking forward to that. So yeah,
And
our
do you have any
website.
and do you have any parting messages for the audience?
I just want to thank everyone. What I know is we covered a lot of ground in these
Mhm.
90 minutes. Uh, some of the things I shared may be a very different way of thinking for some people, and for others, it's right up the alley of what they've always thought. I just want to thank everyone for the love they bring to this world right now, for being here. Man, this is the time to be here. We're wired for change. We're going to get through this together. And I think the events of the world are actually pushing us to find the best version of ourselves and to find our true divinity so that we can share it with others and bring it to light in the world. So I want to thank everyone for everything they're doing to be the best version of themselves and to create the best world possible.
Greg, this is by far one of the most important conversations I think I've recorded on this show, and I can't wait for this to get out into the world. I think it's very, very needed. Thank you so much for being a light in this world and in some of the darker areas of this world, of what we're dealing with. And thank you for helping awaken the planet, my friend. I appreciate you wholeheartedly.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for the community that you've created. You are a hub for so many people. And I want to tell you, I've been out of the country, and it's not just here. All over the world, people say they have seen me on your podcast. So you are a worldwide celebrity, brother, and you do a beautiful job. Thank you for being a hub of this community, this virtual community that brings us together in a beautiful way with a message, a true message of hope and possibility.
Appreciate you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.